U.S. Selective Persecution versus Donald J. Trump and others. They'll use it on you too, on all who oppose the regime.
Remember the guy who secretly taped Planned Parenthood selling dead baby parts? Whatever happened to him? David Daleiden was charged with a crime. And now, after years in courts, he is ordered to pay more than $20 million. His real crime being bringing to light the truth about the abortion industry's harvesting and sale of aborted baby parts, a business which is protected by the government. The court judgment also placed a gag order on him, prohibiting him from publishing more than 500 hours of unreleased undercover footage he gathered during his investigation. All this after the abortion industry never argued that what he uncovered and published was false. His crime was opposing the regime. But at least he avoided prison. Charges that would have put him in prison for 22 years were finally dropped in 2016. So David wasn't added to the fast-growing list of U.S. and Canadian political prisoners, but the nightmarish ordeal of being persecuted by the federal government is itself a punishment, one that destroys the lives of many of its victims. Because one of the most important things to understand about the persecution of David Daleiden for the crime of exposing the crimes of leftists is selective prosecution. As the Thomas More Society, who defended David in court, says, quote, "The selective, discriminatory nature of the prosecution of David Daleiden could not be more in the spotlight. David Daleiden is the only journalist ever charged with a violation of the undercover recording law by the California Attorney General." Unquote. In other words, mass media journalists were free to do what David did to cover stories. Only he was prosecuted. So his crime was not doing the same thing the mass media reporters did. His crime was doing the opposite of what they did, telling the truth. Having gotten total control of the justice system, leftists and their rhino-controlled opposition allies are free to persecute whomever they want and to let themselves and other leftists go. It is called selective prosecution or selective enforcement. Prosecutors are dredging up ancient Civil War-era laws to persecute J6 protesters and are using selective and vindictive prosecution to try to prevent Trump from campaigning and to keep him off ballots in 2024. So it's worth briefly looking at exactly how selective enforcement works, because it's getting a lot worse. And if you publicly oppose the regime, the weapon that leftists are using against David Daleiden and Donald Trump may be coming for you soon. Maybe you need to know what you will be up against.
How the selective enforcement force multiplier works.
What gives government police, prosecutors, and judges the ability to arrest, charge, and imprison whomever they want, whether or not their victim ever did a single wrong thing? Partly their control of the government, but also overregulation. If there are literally hundreds of thousands of federal crimes and hundreds of thousands more state crimes to choose from, and there are, then every American is a felon, many times over. A leftist prosecutor chooses a victim, say someone who opposes leftist policies, and it's a piece of cake to find a crime to charge that person with. So, are there enough federal crimes for our rulers to pull this selective enforcement thing off? You be the judge. In 2019, C-SPAN broadcast an interview with Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. He told an anecdote about how, out of curiosity, he once asked his law clerks to find out the total number of federal crimes that were on the books. They returned an answer of between 4,000 and 4,500 federal crimes. But then Gorsuch asked them to find out how many punishable federal crimes had been created by federal regulators. They came back with the answer that over 300,000 federal crimes had been created by the late 1990s, at which time the people counting the laws had given up and stopped counting. In 1788, James Madison wrote in the Federalist No. 62, quote, "It will be of little avail to the people that the laws are made by men of their own choice, if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read," unquote. Can you read 400,000 criminal laws? In 1798, the U.S. Constitution created a grand total of 3 federal crimes: piracy, treason, and counterfeiting. 200 years later, no one could even count the federal crimes, let alone read them. In the book Overregulated, we call selective enforcement a government. force multiplier. Because the huge number of crimes alone multiplies their effect. Their vast number means that everyone breaks the laws, and so anyone can be charged, tried, found guilty, and imprisoned, whether or not those people really did anything wrong or hurt anyone. And prosecutors can pick out the people who oppose leftist policies and persecute them. In his book, The Criminalization of Almost Everything, Harvey Silverglate quoted Stalin's infamous butcher and henchman Lavrenti Beria, who said, "Show me the man, and I'll find you the crime." Silverglate pointed out, quote, "That really is something that has survived the Soviet Union and has arrived in the good old USA. This is not an exaggeration," unquote. In 2023, Democrat Representative Jamal Bowman set off a fire alarm and lied about removing emergency signs from doors. Bowman was charged with a misdemeanor and agreed to pay a $1,000 fine and write an apology, and he said that even the misdemeanor charge itself would be dismissed in 3 months. Leftist rioters and looters rob stores and burn buildings as police stand by and watch and do nothing. Meanwhile, J6 protesters who did not even set foot in the Capitol are being threatened with long prison terms, kept in solitary confinement, and denied trial month after month for crimes such as trespassing. Ayn Rand wrote,
"There's no way to rule innocent men. The only power government has is the power to crack down on criminals. Well, when there aren't enough criminals, one makes them. One declares so many things to be a crime that it becomes impossible for men to live without breaking laws."
The government doesn't want the power to put everyone in prison so that it can put everyone in prison. They want the power to put everyone in prison so that they can put anyone in prison, anyone that they choose. Meanwhile, the government regulators and the leftists who support them can act with impunity, can do pretty much whatever they want. There will be no punishment for them. Thus ends the rule of law, a part of which requires that the government regulators be subject to the laws that they create. In olden days, the FBI called famous criminals public enemies. Now the FBI is the USA KGB, and the American public is the enemy. Among those considered public enemies by the FBI back in the day were John Dillinger and Al Capone. What if there had been 10,000 or 100,000 such bank robbers and bootleggers in the 1930s and in the succeeding decades? Could they have done even a tiny fraction of the amount of damage to America that the FBI and the rest of the deep state has done? Those old-time crooks were a mild head cold for America at worst. The FBI and U.S. Justice Department and Soros-funded prosecutors and Obama-appointed judges are cancer. The cancer does not die, it grows. You are its enemy.
Thank you for your interest in Rightful Freedom. Please help us grow by liking and subscribing and commenting. We would love your feedback and see more content at our website, rightfulfreedom.com.